Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. My name is Autumn Jordan, and I am a urban nature organizer at Nature Canada today. I'm excited to talk to you this afternoon or this morning, depending on the time zone that you're in, about effective stewardship strategies for cat and bird welfare with the Stewardship Centre for British Columbia. We're just going to wait a couple moments as folks get settled in this morning before we get started. Just as a reminder, since we're using the Zoom webinar feature today, that you'll be muted throughout the speaker series. And if you have any questions, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You should see next to the participant bar. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to pop them in there and I'll be keeping tabs on that. And if you do have any tech issues, please feel free to send me a chat message as well. Everyone, all of the panelists and attendees can use the chat function. And if you are having any tech issues Zoom wise, please just send me an email there, which I've put in the chat. Just say jordan@naturecanada.ca and I'll do my best to troubleshoot throughout the presentation. It's really exciting having everyone here today. The presentation will be recorded and available on our YouTube channel at a later date. But if you did register for the event and you have to dip out early, I'll do my best to get the recording to everyone before it's uploaded on our YouTube channel. And with that, yeah, thank you all again for being here today. I'm super excited to get started. It's a very hot topic that I think will be very useful for everyone involved with the Bird Friendly City program and anyone just interested and has a cat and loves birds. There's a lot of great information that we'll be able to learn together and tools that we can take after this webinar to use in our own communities to make them more bird friendly. I know we're getting started a bit early here today, so let's wait another minute or so before I introduce our speakers. And if anyone, like I said, if you have any questions or tech issues, please make sure to send me an email or write it in the chat. And you won't be able to see yourself during today's presentation as we're using the webinar feature. So if that is new to you, that's why. Each speaker will be pinned during their presentation as well while they're chatting. So you won't see all of our pretty faces of the panelists up. You'll just see the specific panelist speaking about their slides we'll be seeing today during the presentation. Anna, would we be able to advance to the next slide, please? Awesome. So I've been chatting about our wonderful speakers today. Here they are. You'll be hearing from all of them today. The first one being Blair from the Stewardship Centre for BC. She is the executive director there since 2010, providing leadership and facilitating collaborative stewardship initiatives with partners in government, industry, and non-governmental organizations at the community, regional, and provincial level. Our second speaker, Meghann, is the Manager for Companion Animal Welfare Science and Policy at the British Columbia SPCA. Meghann has worked for the British Columbia Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals since 2009 in the areas of research, education, advocacy, and policy. Our third speaker is Elizabeth Gao, who is a research scientist with Environment and Climate Change Canada. Dr. Elizabeth Gao is an animal behavioral ecologist, a conservation biologist, and a research scientist at Environment and Climate Change Canada. Her research aims to understand why animal welfare animals and wildlife move and use different habitats throughout their lifetime, including following migratory animals across the globe, which is super exciting and cool. I'm looking forward to learning more about that. And our fourth speaker is James Casey, who is the conservation lead at Birds Canada. James works at building support for conservation actions within the Fraser Estuary important bird and biodiversity area. Prior to joining Birds Canada, he earned his master's degree in international environmental policy. And with that, I'll let DG take it away.
It's actually Elizabeth is first, so yeah, we must have switched the order a little bit, so we'll let Elizabeth take it away.
All right, thank you very much. So I'm going to start off by giving a bit of a background about cats to kind of frame some good use and context that will set up our next speakers today. So when we think about cats, it's really important to think about their history and where they came from. And so domestic cats evolved from African wildcats, and they did this relatively recently. So we're talking about 10,000 years, and that may seem like a long time, but when we're thinking about evolutionary time periods, that's actually quite short. So what that means is that domestic cats actually have a lot of the very same characteristics as their wild African cat ancestors. So their physical body is very similar. A lot of their behavior is very similar. And so next slide. And so cats are both have these very wild sides and also their companion side. And so a group in the UK has coined domestic cats wild companions. And because they really have these dual roles in our society, including their social roles of being our companion animals, but they also historically have often functioned as pest controllers. And also some people perceive them as good pest controllers now. Next slide. And so we think about cats, and there's all kinds of different terms floating around with domestic cats. Domestic cats is the overall species. People call them different names depending on their lifestyle. And so I want to introduce you to three very different cats with three different lives. And these are actually real cats. Klingon, next slide, is an indoor only cat. Never goes outside unless it's on a leash and in a leash or in a catio, so it's supervised. And Klingon has a really great life, plays with all kinds of toys, has quite a lot of enrichment in his house, and gets fed multiple times a day, as well as lots of snacks and so on. Next slide. And Sorrento, although it spends a lot of time indoors, also is put outside by his owners. And Sorrento loves walking around his yard as well as the yards of several of his neighbors. But unfortunately, one day Sorrento never came back. And what happened to this cat, we don't know. Next slide, please. And Bobby does not have any owners, does not spend any time indoors, and persists entirely basically wild, where Bobby has to eat wild animals such as chipmunks or mice or birds to survive. And so persists entirely off of whatever Bobby can find to eat. Bobby also really likes female cats and searches them out and probably has sired many, many kittens at this point. Next slide. So it's really our behaviors, human behaviors, that affect cats. And when we're talking about outdoor cats or free roaming cats, as they're often called, it's not Klingon that's affecting the number of outdoor cats. It's Bobby and Sorrento, particularly if they're not spayed or neutered. And very rapidly, cats that are outdoors will reproduce. Next slide. And so we can go from a single cat that can produce 4 kittens a year or 4 kittens every 5 months to well over 30 kittens in a matter of 1.5 years. And so very quickly, if populations are left unchecked and uncontrolled, the number of cats can escalate to really large numbers, much higher than other numbers of animals that we often see, particularly in urban areas. Next slide. But I want to acknowledge, because this is really important and goes back to thinking about cats as this wild side, they need to engage in their natural wild behaviors. And so there are a lot of benefits, and there's a lot of proponents of allowing cats to roam freely so they can engage in these natural behaviors, such as climbing, scratching, hunting as a natural behavior, and spraying. And putting a cat outside often reduces unwanted behaviors from these wild behaviors not being able to be fulfilled in an indoor environment if there's not enough enrichment. And cats also sometimes provide, as we move to more urbanized landscapes, a deep connection that people have to nature because they're so plentiful, and we also connect with them at that companion animal level. So sometimes cats provide that connection to nature that we don't always get in urban environments. Next slide, please. Despite some of these benefits, there's also a large number of negatives to allowing cats to roam freely. They, of course, kill wild animals, and these are images from some of the trail cameras that our research teams have had up in cities in Canada, including a rabbit and a Pacific wren that is caught in Vancouver. And cats will kill in Canada alone upwards of 350 million birds a year. And worldwide, the numbers are well into the billions. And not only do they hunt and kill wild animals, they also face numerous welfare threats when they're allowed to roam, such as being eaten by coyotes. This often makes the news when there's coyotes in an area that are unfortunately harming or killing cats, as well as a lot of cats. And these are very high numbers of cats that we often don't realize are hit by cars or injured in other ways. Some recent reports have also talked about some of the costs of cats, as well as other species that are considered invasive. And cats are considered to be the third most costly species when we consider their damage costs, their management costs, as well as a wide variety of other costs associated with allowing them outdoors and to roam freely. And so they are also costly to society. And finally, they spread disease, and cats are known to spread well over 130 zoonoses. These are diseases that can actually be passed on to humans or other animals. And they do this in two different ways. So they can either, a cat can do it from another cat with their interaction, from capturing and hunting another animal, which they can then spread on to humans or other cats. Or we ourselves could actually pass on diseases to cats that can then be spread into the environment. And this is actually a concern with COVID-19, for instance. Next slide. And so cats really present this multitude of different issues. And recently, we've kind of talked about in the past, people are aware that there's a lot of connections between ecosystems and animals and humans. They haven't really coined a name for it until more recently, when they call it One Health. And what One Health is trying to link and understand the connections between the environment, animals, and humans, so that we can create healthy ecosystems, healthy animals, and healthy humans that can make our societies more inclusive and really better for everyone and everything. So next slide. Within One Health, and also surrounding cats, there are many different groups and people that care about cats, including everyone that is here cares about cats. It's cat owners, people that love cats, veterinarians, people that work in shelters, people that are having the ability to change policy in some way or make other types of changes, as well as ecologists, epidemiologists, nature enthusiasts, and generally the general public cares one way or another about cats. Next slide. So because of all this complexity around cats and the challenges that we see with cats from these multiple different sides and all the different stakeholders involved, really need approaches to kind of bring together a diversity of views to reduce conflict and help solve this complexity. And so there is a framework called Translation Ecology that essentially what Translation Ecology does is set of 6 principles, which involves a collaboration, engagement, commitment, communication, a process that involves buying in from everyone, and a decision framing context. And using these sort of nonlinear steps in a way can provide a framework to bringing different groups together to help us work together to develop and conduct research and just actual change that addresses these complex sociological, ecological, and political aspects of these challenging problems such as cats. And so DG is now going to elaborate about what we've been doing using this translation ecology framework to try to make progress on solving issues surrounding free roaming cats.
Great, thanks very much, Elizabeth. You set this up very well. So we all know that there are some serious challenges, and it's a complex issues. So the Stewardship Centre for BC, with funding from Environment and Climate Change Canada, we've set out to work with and collaborate with ENGOs, wildlife advocacy groups, veterinarians, cat and animal welfare organizations, and municipalities, really to work together with the goal of having both cats as well as ecosystems and wildlife to be able to have a positive environment. We'd like to acknowledge the partners in the Vancouver Cats and Birds Committee, and we've just recently updated our timing and work with the South Okanagan, so we have some new partners there as well. Next slide, please. So we basically know what the best practices are. It used to be that best practice for cats was just let them go outside. But we now know there are implications both for the cats as well as birds and wildlife. We have best practices such as Elizabeth mentioned, indoor enrichment, having responsible pet owners, having cat-proof fencing, catios, leash trains, for example. Our project was really all about encouraging those early adopters of those best management practices through having case studies, decals, community-based social marketing, incentives to adopt those best practices. In terms of where we're at, we're definitely, as you can see, at the early adopters stage, and our intent is to build momentum with getting general acceptance of those practices, and then ultimately, similar to like smoking, anti-smoking campaigns, seatbelts, etc., to really moving to that the general adoption of the best practices will be the new social norm. But as you can see, we're still at the early adopter stage, so lots of work to be done. Next slide, please. So as Elizabeth mentioned, really what we're looking to do in our Cats and Birds project is to operationalize those principles and move them into action. One of the things that should be noted is that although we've got these 6 different aspects, these actions are non-linear. So a lot of times we're working at all the same thing at the same time. So in terms of collaboration, what we've done is we have worked through a statement of collaboration, and that guides all our work. And our partners who are working on it have all signed on to the statement of collaboration. So right now we have a statement of collaboration in Vancouver, and we've just introduced the concept in the interior of BC for the South Okanagan. In terms of framing our decisions, we're looking at that to support better decision-making through community education, adoption of strategies, and eventually that folks would have a more science-based approach to decision-making in regards to whether or not they allow their cat outdoors or not. In terms of our process, we've identified goals and actions, and really all decisions are made and informed by science as well as collaboration between the partners. There's a number of things that mostly we agree on things. There's a few things we've decided that we will not work on together, but for the most part, there's a lot of consensus about the way to move forward. In terms of, we recognize that we need to have a really broad cross-section, multi-sectoral, because this is a wicked problem, as Elizabeth said a couple of meetings ago. We need to engage in from multiple sides, and that way we'll actually be able to move forward. Animal welfare can't do it on their own. Conservation can't do it on their own. We need academic partners, we need government partners. And right now we have over 50 participating organizations with 9 core organizations working together. As a group, we recognize this is a long-term approach. We recognize social change takes time, and that we are moving forward, focusing on all our common goals. And then finally, communication. We have agreed upon key messages that we send out through various channels through all our different organizations. And we're taking it from, we have to use a consistent approach to a consistent effort to make sure that this moves forward in the long term. Next slide, please. Just want to touch base briefly to say that one of the things that the Stewardship Centre has done, in addition to our partners, is really work on resources for public education, collaborative outreach. We've used a community-based social marketing approach in Vancouver with incentives, and as well, we have a veterinary education. So we're reaching out to veterinarians when they're both doing continuing education, as well as when they're in vet school and also vet tech school, to include some information on these best practices and the issue overall. So now I'm going to turn it over to Meghann to talk a little bit about why the BC Spca is involved.
Awesome. Thanks so much, DG and Elizabeth, for setting that up. I really feel like kind of the word of the day is collaboration. And so that's why I'm here today, is to speak about why the BC Spca would choose to get involved in the cats and birds issue. And so, speaking for ourselves, we actually kind of have a stake in the game on both sides. So we consider ourselves to be both cat people and we're bird people as well. Next slide, please. So it's right there actually in our mission statement. So our mission is to protect and enhance the quality of life for domestic, farm, and wild animals in British Columbia. So this is a pretty big mandate that encompasses, of course, cats as well as birds and other wildlife. Next slide, please. Also, we have position statements. So we produce position statements that run the gamut of animal welfare issues. So speaking to ones that relate to what we're here for today. So our position on cat welfare. In this position, we are, of course, as an animal welfare organization, dedicated to promoting the health and welfare of cats. But also in this position statement, there is a talk about responsibility and the understanding that cats are all of our responsibility in order to deal with these concerns. So, of course, we're encouraging people to take responsibility for cats in their communities. Next slide, please. And then in our wildlife welfare statement, of course, wildlife are interesting because they're, of course, wildlife that are under human care. So if they're in a zoo or in a wildlife rehabilitation center, that sort of thing. But also we are concerned about generally the impact that humans have on the environment and therefore the impact of free living wildlife and their welfare. So here in our position statement on wildlife welfare, we are acknowledging and wanting to reduce both the intentional and unintentional human impacts. And of course, that includes cats. Next slide, please. So I think when people hear the word BC Spca or other SPCAs across the country or humane societies, they definitely tend to think of work with dogs and cats. And so of course we do that work as well. So here's just a graph to give a snapshot of our cat intake. So those dark blue bars are representing the total numbers of cats we've received since 2010 up until last year. So you can see some variation with a bit of numbers up and down depending on the year. And then that gold line is actually the trend line that shows cats as a percent of our total intake. So all of the animals that we're taking in. I haven't included farm animals here, but basically this would include cats, dogs, and then our small animals like rabbits and that sort of thing, showing that there's just generally an upward trend of cats representing a greater proportion of our total intake. And part of this makes sense because actually dog intake to shelters across North America has actually been on the decline. So we are actually seeing cats becoming a greater proportion of that total intake. Next slide, please. Then looking also at kittens. Kittens make up another significant proportion of our intake. So I've separated out cats from kittens just so you can see the numbers and get an idea of what we're dealing with on a yearly basis. So here again, we have the dark blue bars representing our intake, and then that trend line showing it's a little bit variable with kittens, as you can see from year to year, with some spikes in there too. But generally, we are seeing a downward decline, and this of course could use some further investigation. But off the bat, when I see sort of a dip like this, I'm thinking of the fact that that general increase over time in spay neuter, as more folks are understanding just how important it is to have our cats spayed and neutered at a young age, because of course they can reproduce as kittens. Basically, even before 6 months of age, they can already be having litters of their own. So hopefully a decline in kitten intake speaks to the success of spay neuter initiatives across the province. Next slide, please. And so looking then at just our top sources of where we're getting our cats and kittens, it's actually for both cats and kittens, strays and owner surrenders. So that's when guardians who are no longer able to care for their cats are surrendering them to one of our shelters. So we do see that stray and surrender are the top reasons for both cats and kittens, with actually strays, which are the kind of the ones we're thinking about today when we think of free roaming or outdoor cat issues. It's those stray cats that we want to turn our attention to. So we actually have over 50% of adult cats are coming to us as strays, and then for kittens, that's close to 50% as well. Next slide, please. And then the Bc Spca might be a bit unique in terms of the fact that we also do have a wildlife rehabilitation center that's on Vancouver Island, Wild Ark. And so here I've got a snapshot of our cat intake. So this is wildlife that members of the public have brought to us that they know have been caught by a cat, because either it's their cat or they've seen the cat with the wildlife in their mouth, and they've rescued and brought to our center. So we have, again, the dark blue lines representing the numbers of animals that have been caught by cats that are brought to us each year. And then that trend line again showing as a percent of total intake. So what's interesting is actually that the numbers of caught by cats, that seems to be increasing, but as a proportion of our total, that line is relatively flat and hovers around 15%. And that's just because in general, as you know, humans are kind of encroaching into wildlife territory, and people are just noticing these things more, perhaps, that in terms of that human wildlife coexistence, that we are actually seeing more wildlife each year being brought to our center in general. So the caught by cat intake is actually, as a proportion of that, remaining relatively steady. Next slide, please. And then if we're interested in a quick breakdown of what those wildlife might be that are being brought to us as caught by cats. So we have mostly birds and mammals, with just a small proportion of reptiles and amphibians, just in case you're interested. So the small mammals exactly would be like your rabbits or your squirrels, that sort of thing, and then all sorts of birds as well. Next slide, please. So that was our sort of shelter work. So I would say that's sort of the reactive work of animals that are brought to us and us needing to care for them and rehabilitating them or adopting them out in the case of cats. But then we also do preventive work. So this is work that we're trying to get at the root causes of some of these issues. And so it definitely involves all of these things that you see listed here. So we do have quite a few strong emphasis on education. We have youth programs. So that would be going into schools. We have summer camps, we have workshops. And of course, with the pandemic, we've also pivoted as well to not only doing in person we were doing before, but we've also now included virtual programs as well. So definitely a heavy emphasis on youth, with the idea that if kids are introduced to these ideas at a young age, developing those empathy and compassion skills, and growing up and then maybe making different decisions based on the information they received when they were younger. And of course, we're always doing adult education as well through our website, through our social media, as well as our Animal Sense magazine that comes out twice a year. Then in terms of advocacy, we run campaigns throughout the year on both the cat side and the wildlife side. So some examples, a couple of years ago, we did a catio campaign more locally in the Lower Mainland here in BC, which was basically to promote a catio tour that people could go on and see examples of catios, from the very simple to the quite elaborate, to sort of give them inspiration that, you know, everyone's got sort of different space at their own homes, but basically there's sort of a catio out there, I think, for everyone, whether that's a simple window box or a freestanding one in your backyard. So it was just a way to inspire people to maybe do that at home themselves. Also rodenticide ban campaigns, that sort of thing for wildlife. And of course, collaboration is really important for advocacy, because we are, you know, calling on our supporters to sign petitions, do that sort of thing, and ultimately to be able to take those numbers to government and work with government and hopefully see some policy and legislative change as well. And that, of course, brings me to policy. So we do some bylaw work. We actually have recently launched on our website a kind of a model bylaw tool where people can search for bylaws having to do with different animals and can see sort of some examples of ones that we would consider more progressive in terms of animal welfare. And then we are also involved in standard work. So sitting on different, whether that's provincial or even national committees that have to do with animal welfare and helping to set those animal welfare standards for cats. And then in terms of research, we do our own. So we have done some cat guardian polling in the past, just looking at different attitudes and behaviors towards cats, how people are caring for their cats, just so that we can get a sense of where British Columbians are at. And then, of course, collaboration. So not only participating in committees like the Cats and Birds Committee locally here in Vancouver, we also collaborate with universities as well to do research both with wildlife as well as with cats. And then finally, our outreach work. So this is really important work, I feel, in terms of getting at some of the issues of spay, neuter, and ID, especially with cats. So of course, we do have a grant program in which we give grants out to other organizations and communities that are doing cat work, such as TNR, spay, neuter. And we also have, our shelters have funds as well that can assist low-income cat owners to be able to spay, neuter their pets. Next slide, please. So finally, I would speak to a bit about why would and why should animal welfare organizations such as ours, specifically cat groups, get involved. First of all, I think it's really important to be at the table, to be a voice for cats. And going back to the slides that were shown before, all about that collaboration, that communication, it's so important to have multiple voices represented. So we're sort of seeing the issue from more than one side, because I think a lot of times we can operate in these silos, so focused on the day-to-day doing what we're doing, and we forget to kind of look up and see the issue from another perspective. And of course, at the table, we are bringing our own expertise with cats as well as cat folks. So I think that we have, working with cats means that we have a good understanding of the people that get involved in cat rescue as well as cat guardians. And that can give us a sense of what's going to be most effective in terms of our education and advocacy campaigns together. And then sort of as I implied earlier, the increasing our collective understanding of the cats and birds issues. So that's one thing I really love about this, is just understanding more of the wildlife side, because I work mostly on the cat side of things. And so definitely having all of those voices increases our collective knowledge and understanding. And of course, I think what's really important in this translational ecology model also is to challenge our personal perspective. So as I mentioned, right, working in those silos and often speaking to people that think like us and have, similar ideas, and coming to the table and being challenged with different ideas. That is really great, not only for sort of personal growth, but also I think for the growth of these committees and these groups that we form. So thanks so much. That's it for me. On to James.
Excellent. Thank you. And a big thank you to DG and the team at the Stewardship Centre for BC. They've done a great job in applying this concept of translational ecology to what is a really challenging organization. As an organization committed to conserving the wild birds of Canada, we at Birds Canada were thrilled to have this opportunity to sign on to a statement of collaboration to work with others across multiple sectors in addressing this major threat to wild birds. So that was obviously a no-brainer. In the conservation sector, we talk a lot about the need for behavioral change and shifting our relationship with the natural world. But as we get into the cats and birds challenge, we come to learn that there really are few relationships more deeply held than the relationships we have with our pets, be that cats or dogs or other pets. And so you can imagine we really do appreciate the insights that we get from our partners, such as the SPCA, about how people relate to cats and how to engage with that community. But we know that we borrow our future from the children that need us to tackle these difficult issues and find ways to transform our lives. And as so often the case in looking at environmental issues, we can look to the birds to learn how to address some of the environmental challenges in our world. Next slide, please. And it's worth highlighting that although as a group we focus on the solution, that is people caring for their cats, we are fully aware that this is a major biodiversity issue. Unfortunately, Canada has a number of urban populations located in underprotected biodiversity hotspots. And as our urban densities go up, we see the number of cats increase and also the number of other related urban threats. So while cats are linked to bird mortalities across Canada, they're also, as we've heard earlier in this presentation, a major source of mortality for small mammals, reptiles, amphibians, all of which can have populations of at-risk species. So cats are an example of a completely manageable conservation area where the individual actions of one person can have a real impact on biodiversity more broadly. So this is a broad biodiversity challenge in addition to one in which we can change our personal lives. Next slide, please. At Birds Canada, as a partner, we're really pleased to see this project occurring in the Greater Vancouver area. The Greater Vancouver area has a population of ballpark, let's say 2.5 million. So it makes one of Western Canada's densest populations, or is Western Canada's densest population, but it's also located along the Pacific Flyway and is Western Canada's most important migratory bird habitat, supporting over 1.7 million birds every year. A lot of those are waterfowl and shorebirds, but it also contains a large number of small migratory birds that are either overwintering, breeding, or just passing through. And these species all vulnerable to being preyed upon by outdoor cats. So it's a priority site for conservation, and we're pleased to see the project having as much success as it is here. Next slide, please. In 2015, the partners started working on the Vancouver bird strategy. So the city of Vancouver agreed to develop this strategy. It has voluntary guidelines around design for buildings and design for outdoor spaces, as well as commitments to research and monitoring, education, and exploring the economic opportunities that come from bird watching and other green benefits. In 2021, I think Canada or City of Vancouver was among the first to receive the bird-friendly city certification from Nature Vancouver. But there's still a lot of work that remains to be done, as a lot of the guidelines are voluntary, and the city still has not addressed in its bylaws the issue of roaming cats. So we still need to do a lot of community support building and engagement to shift the bar in that perspective. However, the strategy does provide an opportunity for the birds and cats working group to function underneath that perspective, and that has helped us learn a lot from one another, and then also translate that to other supporting networks. Next slide, please. So because the Fraser Delta is an important bird and biodiversity area, we have this network of caretakers who allow us to take what we're learning through the cats and bird work and reach out to other municipalities to try and embed that in their respective biodiversity strategies. For instance, the city of Delta, through work with the Delta Naturalist, has been able to engage that community as well. So we're spreading this work beyond just the urban core. Next slide, please. And there's that network is super important in terms of expanding the reach of the group beyond anything one group can do on its own. So this is a slide from 2 weeks ago where a lady in Richmond reached out to us and asked, she wanted to put on a bird walk and a session in her backyard. She'd been doing a ton of work making her backyard bird friendly in terms of planting native plants and putting dots on the windows and reducing pesticide use, all those individual actions that people can do. And so we were able to go do that. And in the process of that, take the material from the Stewardship Centre for BC and add that to the communication to a group of people that just wanted to come and learn about how can they help make their backyards bird friendly. Next slide, please. And so as kind of one final benefit I would identify is that as working as in a network like this, our overall resilience as a group and our ability to persist through time has increased as well. So this is a photo of a group that gathered in 2018. Like I said, there was the strategy 2015, 2018. We're coming up on close to a decade worth of work on this topic. And the only way that really happens is if we can support one another through time. As funding ebbs and flows, we lose colleagues to other challenges. Although DG's been there all the way through, it's really each of us, many hands make lighter work kind of approach. And so that's been another key learning from this collaborative, and something I would encourage all of you to consider when thinking about your next steps. And with that, I'll leave it to DG to kind of wrap up with some key learnings.
Right. Thanks very much, James. Boy, you know, it's always nice hearing everybody's perspective again. It gets me all energized and excited and really thankful for the work that we've been able to do. So as everybody has noted, that this collaboration and using the framework of translational ecology has really helped us move things forward. So we focused over the last year with a campaign in Vancouver. So, and that was based on the research that Elizabeth and team did to determine where are the cats roaming in Vancouver. So that research informed the focus of our two areas in Vancouver. So we had worked in the Mount Pleasant area in the winter of 2022. And then in this past summer, we were focused out near UBC in the West Point Grey area. We did before and after surveys to see whether or not there was any change in uptake, and really ramped up our in-person events, online outreach, and including the Happy Cat Gallery, where we highlight best practices. And basically, overall, we had over 1,800 copies of printed materials were distributed. We went and did door-to-door in 550 locations, 18 events. And really, in terms of the social media, this figure really stands out to me. You know, almost 60,000 people were reached through our posts and articles online. Next slide, please. And I think, so in addition to working together to maximize the information that is available and out there, really, and there's Meghann again, talking about how it's the collaborative approach to bring everybody together, and it's a positive experience. So we recognize that we can do so much more together, and it really amplifies that conservation action. And overall, during the course of the work that we've been doing on the cat and bird issue, we've seen over a 30% increase of active collaborators over the project timeline. And actually that number is even greater since our work in the South Okanagan, our workshop last week. And I haven't done the calculation yet, but definitely that increase in collaboration really will increase our efficacies. Next slide, please. And I think that the attitudes are changing. Back, and I will be doing another slide in 2022, but really looking at how many people think it's okay to let a cat roam. In between 2017 and 2019, we saw an 11% decline, and 17% more cat owners believe that it's inappropriate to allow cats to roam outdoors. Whereas when prior to that, it really was thought that it was okay. And we'll do another survey at the mid-March or March 2023 to see whether or not that shift is continuing. And I'm quite confident that it will be. Next. So in terms of next steps to wrap up, we recognize this is a long-term, we're in it for the long term, and that we need to continue to broaden our stakeholder engagement. We're going to use science-based decision-making in terms of which areas to target, and that really looks at, as James was mentioning, in BC, the Lower Mainland, Greater Vancouver, Fraser Valley is a very high priority because of high population numbers and high species that are at risk. And as well in British Columbia, the southern interior near Penticton and the like is also a high biodiversity and high population pressure. So we will target our action on those high priority areas, continue to evaluate success. And I think in part, today's webinar was really about sharing our learnings so that we can scale this out to other communities across Canada. And with that, I think we'll move it to the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you all so much. I learned a lot, and I hope everyone did as well. We have a few questions in the Q&A that I'll get started. Feel free, anyone who's joined in recently throughout the presentation, there's the Q&A function you should see at the bottom of your screen, and we can answer that in the remaining time that we have today. So the first question is for Elizabeth, coming from Jenna. Can you elaborate on the cost to taxpayers resulting from free roaming cats?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So the information I present about the economic cost of cats, that's it's based on like a global scale, and they're looking at, you know, specific management costs that are estimated from what available information there is. In that specific paper, one of the things that they talk about is we don't actually know the cost to taxpayers. This is very, like, this economic sort of analysis are actually quite new, and so there's a lot more that needs to be done to kind of get at you know, those specific costs, and all these analyses are actually really based on the US. We don't have that in Canada, so those are kind of next steps that I'm hoping that people that work more in that sort of discipline will start to address, because there's a lot of things that we need to know from our side as well, of like, what are the actual economic costs of allowing cats to free roam.
Thank you. And Jen also has another question for Meghann. Can the link be posted to the Bylaw animal search sites that you mentioned?
Yeah, for sure. So I should have maybe typed that in the chat, but it's spca.bc.ca/animal bylaws. So the search tool is right at the top with some nice big buttons where you can search by species and stuff. So we're quite excited about it being hopefully pretty user friendly, and definitely send us feedback. There's an email link on that page as well.
Thank you, Meghann. And then the next question we have from Kathleen, who, if you'd like to come off mute and elaborate on your question, you're more than welcome to do so. Is there any representation from feline behaviorists as part of the collaboration? Some of the marketing education is not related to cat emotional well-being, keeping them indoors, in regards to the Happy Cat brochure.
Yeah. I can start. I think this is one of these. It's a big question. The short answer is we do not have a specific scientific advisor in terms of a feline behavioralist. However, we do have representation from veterinarians who work with cats, and obviously they are focused on cat welfare and signed off on the Happy Cat brochure and its content. And I don't know whether, Meghann, you want to jump in as well to answer that?
Sure. So definitely for our own work at the Bc Spca, we definitely have behavior specialists that help us develop our materials and our perspective. And I would definitely agree with you that it's not so much black and white that bringing cats indoors is a panacea. That definitely there are risks to indoor cats as well. the idea that, of course, being outside means that they can perform a lot of their natural behaviors, and that it's that much more challenging in an indoor environment to meet their needs. So our materials are focused on providing that support and what it means to provide that indoor enrichment that would allow an animal, a cat, to be able to satisfy their hunting instincts and that sort of thing. But of course, veterinarians would also point to some of the disease risks and stuff that can be caused by stress of an indoor life. So I think we spend a lot of care and attention looking after dogs, and I think historically we haven't put as much care and attention necessarily into cats, thinking of them as that sort of belief that they're kind of independent, easy to look after. And I think it's shifting that as well, that cats deserve that same sort of level of attention and care, and that indoor environment needs more focus. So that's definitely the work that we do and will continue to do for sure.
If I can add to the question, so I'm an advocate for keeping cats indoors for sure. I've just worked a lot on the client communication front, and I've done a lot in terms of feline behavior education, specifically through the International Society of Feline Medicine. And feline behavior, the research is still so recent and it is ongoing. And veterinarians, when they're in vet school, they don't really have a focus on feline behavior. And that's why we have veterinary behaviorists, and we have veterinary nutritionists, because there isn't a great focus on that. And with the research being so recent, a lot of these veterinarians are just not in touch with what it is. And it's a big category. And so what I mean by, like, I'm trying to say this in a way, what I mean by, like, some of the marketing or educational materials, it's great. Indoor environmental enrichment, absolutely. But to take, say, most cats are adopted these days, and the majority from the stats you sent are stray cats. These are cats that are familiar with being outside. That's what's normal to them. And while they are absolutely safer inside, they don't entirely understand why they're being kept inside. And they don't really get a period to transition to that kind of a life. So to take an outdoor cat and then adopt him out, and he's a strictly indoor cat, you can provide him all the enrichment you want, but he's going to need opportunities to adjust. And there needs to be some kind of a transition phase there, so that, it's just like taking any wild animal. You take a wild bird and you lock it up in a room, it's going to be very stressed, even if you give it bird food and water. So I'm just wondering if you can include maybe some more information or guidance about that transition phase to indoor living, and how the common things that people think are fun for cats, like looking at wildlife outdoors, or looking at wildlife on a TV screen, or chasing a laser dot. These things are actually very frustrating for cats. It doesn't make them happy to have a window where they can see wildlife, and where they could also potentially see other neighborhood cats. These cats are going to want outside even more.
Yeah, I know we have a lot of questions to go, but I will say that, we definitely recognize that one of the things we're educating folks is about a transition. Like, we're working on some video series for a transition for leash training, for example, to be able to, we recognize it's not something that you can just, put a leash on your cat and go out and walk it. There's tools and resources we need to develop. And certainly if you have a cat that's used to being outdoors all the time, I totally agree. You can't just keep it inside and think that it's going to be happy. There has to be this transition. And I think your point speaks to the fact that we need to have more of these sorts of resources, so that it'll apply to multiple situations. It's not, as we've noted, it's a wicked big problem. It's not just one size fits all. So we've spent quite a bit of time on what content we could include, and I'll just in the Happy Cat brochure, and I'll just do the next question, which is about collaborating with BAT people. And the answer is yes. We do have a little section in our resources on the impact of cats on bats. So I'll leave it there because I know there's a lot of questions to come. Thank you.
Thank you both. And yeah, we'll jump into the next question here. After the bats one is in regards to barn cats in rural communities. Are there alternative effective practices that rural community members can use? And this is from Delaney.
I'm just wondering whether we recognize, I'll just start off that barn cats are definitely a different kettle of fish, if that's okay to use that that term, than an urban cat. And certainly one of the things we're doing right now is some research in the Okanagan, which has the area that we're doing is in part agricultural, to get a sense of how many cats are out there to help inform our work. And we will have to spend more time looking at how do we frame answers to that questions. And I don't know, Elizabeth, whether you want to jump in on that one, or Meghann.
Yeah, I can jump in kind of from the science perspective. There's not a lot of research done on barn cats to, one, understand their impacts in terms of, one, are they effective actual pest controllers in these environments? We don't actually have any controlled experiments to look at that. And so a lot of information is very anecdotal. So it's a complicated thing because I don't think it's very complex, and I don't think we have the exact answers at this time. And so, a lot of our focus has been focused on people in cities because it's sort of that low-hanging fruit. As next steps are going to be shifting into these more rural communities where the potential impact on birds is certainly potentially quite high. Although again, we aren't entirely sure of the magnitude of that impact. So it's I can't say that there's specific recommendations, but it is, as DG was saying, something we have to look at it very differently than we do looking at cats in urban environments.
Thank you. And another question we have is, how do we respond from pushback from other groups who are asserting about feral cats needing to be outside? I think the webinar today brought up a really great concept of working together and just breaking down those communication barriers amongst groups. I don't think anyone here on this call is one side cat, one side bird either. It's a very multifaceted issue. We're all cat lovers and bird lovers. So I think really connecting with those folks and meeting them where they're at, along with education, is maybe a great way to address that, Adrian. But if anyone else on the call has any other points that we might have learned.
I'll just say that one of the things that we found in Vancouver when we were working together on the statement of collaboration is that we have way more in common goals than we have differences, and that to focus in and recognize that we need to work together is how we do it, right? That's how we move this forward, is that we have to communicate, collaborate, and then recognize that we actually have a lot of common goals. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, DG. And Elizabeth, the next question is also for you in regards to how the cats are being tracked with the monitors outside.
Yeah, so we didn't really talk about any of the research that my team does, but I'll say we study cats in different ways. We use cameras that are attached to trees, basically trail cameras, to look at the habitats that cats use. And so it's completely doesn't affect cats at all, really. The other stuff we do is we do put cameras on cats, and all of that is, one, we go through extensive animal care and ethics approvals. And as part of that, we only work with cat owners that they want their cats outside, that they allow their cats outside, and in municipalities where there are no bylaws against free roaming. So everything is entirely voluntary and people can withdraw at any time. And so we aren't forcing cats outdoors in our research. It's all done with people that are they want to participate because they've put their cat outside and they're interested in learning what they do. So we aren't causing any direct harm to the cats, and everything is, as I said, we go through all these really high level protocols every single year to get approval for research that takes into account. We include veterinarians and wide variety of welfare scientists in our work to make sure that everything is fine for cats.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Next question is from Deb. She's interested in learning about how surveys were conducted virtually or with interviews. I think we might have just answered that as well.
Just to get clarity, are you talking about the education surveys? Or are you speaking about the research on outdoor cats? I can speak to the surveys where we did the attitudinal surveys. So we did all that virtually. Okay.
Thank you. And okay, so we answered about the farming community. Anonymous asks, do you think designating cats as an invasive animal would be helpful?
I can answer that. It's like everything related to cats, it's very complicated. There are, from my understanding, in some countries, there may be legal aspects that identifying them as invasive may be helpful. I really can't comment on the specifics in Canada because that hasn't been discussed extensively on that. But it's a complicated thing because how do you define invasiveness with companion animals? It's tricky. So I can't really say one way or the other.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So I think we have enough time for maybe one more question from Jay asking about rat terriers. I am not a dog expert myself, so I don't feel equipped to answer that question. But Meghann, maybe, do you have any insight on that?
We do actually have a position statement that sort of speaks to, I hate even using the word pest control, but that's the term that's kind of used. So we do have a position statement that speaks to humane pest control, and we kind of recognize that in certain instances, dogs may be just, specially trained dogs may work, but we recognize it as similar to cats, that it's not a very humane solution to be dealing with rodents with because of the pain and suffering that can be caused by these methods. So we much prefer, our emphasis is always on prevention and exclusion and that sort of thing. So working with people to prevent these, the entry of rodents and stuff in the first place, so that we aren't having to rely on these lethal methods. So definitely that's on our website under our position statements if people are curious about that.
Thank you, Meghann. And last couple questions here. Is there any focused messaging for cat owners on providing them with resources, for example, low-cost veterinary care for people on disability or unemployed?
Yes, definitely. On our website, we have a whole page that lists lots of different resources for low-income guardians to be able to access spay, neuter, and other veterinary services. We also have our own locations, for instance, like our Vancouver hospital that offers low-cost veterinary services as well. So we have listing by community, which may include our own organization, or sometimes cities, even municipalities might have funds set up that people can access as well. So I don't have the spayneuter.ca will link you to that information. Yeah.
I would just also add is that it really depends on where you are. Larger urban areas have greater access to that sort of thing. And we recognize that, if you're looking at solving the spay neuter issue, there needs to be more accessibility for that moving forward.
Yeah, this is BC specific as well. So depending on which province you're from, some of your larger animal welfare organizations might have that information available too.
Yeah, I was going to add that as well. It really depends on where you live in the country. It's very far wide reaching. Someone who grew up in rural areas, I definitely understand that sometimes those places are less served, but I'd encourage everyone on this call to start doing research into their own community and local SPCA. They have a bunch of wonderful programs. I am sorry if we were unable to get to everyone's questions today. That is the hour on the dot. So I wanted to thank everyone here for attending. We will be sharing the webinar recording with all participants. And I appreciate everyone's time today. Thank you all and have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you. Bye.